Fine. Good evening, everyone, and let's get started with today's session. Yesterday, we have discussed two major topics. First was Arjuna's dilemma and distress, where we discussed the problems faced by Arjuna. Some of these problems he has faced because of other people. So there are external sources from which these problems are coming, and some of the problems are generated within his own mind, with his own emotions, etc. So we have seen both kind of problems that he is facing. So likewise, in our day-to-day life also, we try to correlate with Arjuna's situation and try to see that we may also have similar circumstances. Many times we face problems because of others. We may be upset because of others' behavior, other response, others' bad dealings with us. But at the same time, we also have many problems within us also. So because of something external, we have many other emotions coming within us which disturb us even more. So Arjuna's situation is like that. He's definitely perturbed by the past experiences where he had to face a lot of injustice because of other people's activities. At the same time, currently, when he's on the war field, he's perturbed by his own mind, his own thoughts, his own emotions, etc. And then we went ahead and tried to discuss the solutions which were presented by Sri Krishna. So he started talking and started discussing one by one all the problems that Arjuna faced and trying to give him the solution, going to the core and trying to give him the solution for all the problems that he has proposed. So here I had just listed the major solutions without giving the techniques, without discussing the techniques, how it is being achieved, how it is being accomplished. So today I will try to go deeper and try to start with the techniques that are given in the text to basically implement these solutions. For example, the very first one I have mentioned: be tolerant towards upheaval of life, don't get perturbed by big changes, even death of near ones. So big changes means we have taken an example yesterday that death is supposed to be the biggest change in life. If somebody very close to us dies, then that's one of the biggest shocks that we get. How can we become tolerant towards even those kind of big changes in our life? So this is something he starts with. So very first point he starts with is about life and death, and then the second point that is mentioned over here is equanimity. So I went through all these points and then I arrived at the last point where I mentioned that knowing yourself, knowing the mind, and having full control on the mind, body, that is very important. Unless we have that, none of the above points can be implemented. So first of all, we need to know ourselves, how the body works, how the mind works, how our emotions work. We need to introspect a little bit. We need to watch our thoughts. We need to watch our mind and then try to understand how it works. Then only we will be able to control it, right? So if you don't know, if there is an enemy sitting, if there is some entity who is trying to hurt you, you don't know that person very well. You don't have any grasp of that person's identity. You don't know his activities. He's hidden. He's playing guerrilla war with you. He's attacking you from a hidden side. Then we don't have much scope of finding him and defeating him. So likewise, an uncontrolled mind is compared with an enemy. In Gita, an uncontrolled mind is considered as an enemy, described as an enemy. It says that somebody who has conquered the mind, for him the mind is a very good friend. It can do wonderful things. Whereas somebody who has not conquered the mind, who has not controlled the mind, for him the mind is the biggest enemy. So if we have not conquered the mind and if we don't even pay attention what it actually is, how it actually works, then we are sitting with a dangerous enemy without even knowing his location, his functions, his powers, etc. And that's a dangerous situation. So that's why the first thing that we need to do is to basically knowing the mind, knowing ourselves, knowing the mind, how the mind is working, how all these thoughts are coming, how do we get a better control on these thoughts. So these are going to be the first point. Unless we know that, unless we are basically able to find out what is going on in the mind, unless we are able to basically detach ourselves from the mind and watch the thoughts in the mind, we'll not be able to control it. The first step is detaching ourselves from the mind, detaching ourselves from the thoughts, and trying to observe what is going on in the mind, trying to observe what is going on in the thoughts, then only there is a possibility that we can have control over the thoughts, we can have control over the mind, we can have control over the emotions, all kinds of emotions. Then only we can attain equanimity, then only we can attain peace. So that is the first process that is recommended. And once we achieve that, then all other points that are mentioned over here, that can also be achieved without much difficulty if we are able to accomplish the last point. Now, for each of these major points that I have listed over here, definitely there are many shlokas, many verses where these points are elaborated, discussed. So I will try to go through some of these verses as we discussed. And I have mentioned in the beginning of the course that I will try to keep the theological content limited, but it will not be able to, it will not be very difficult to completely avoid the theological concept. In certain cases, these two concepts, the theological one applications ones, are pretty tightly mixed. But still, I will try to minimize the discussion on the theology aspect because that takes a good amount of time, and I will try to focus more on the practical, the application aspect. But I would say that it is not very easy to completely eliminate the theology part. So in the subsequent slides, I will be going through some of the verses which deal with these strategies, with these techniques, and we'll try to look at some of the very fundamental process that is mentioned in the Gita about controlling the mind, about identifying the mind, about detaching ourselves from the mind and the body, and being an observer of the mind. So initially, this concept of looking at the mind or looking at the thoughts or observing the thoughts, that may not look very simple. We feel like the mind is ourselves. It's not very different from us. Whatever we are thinking, whatever our thoughts are, whatever our emotions are, they are not different from us. They are part of us. So what does it mean to observe the mind? What does it mean to detach from the mind? We are not having a separate entity called mind. It is not something like a object that we can take out and observe it. But what does it mean really to be an observer, and what's the mind, what's the thoughts, etc. So that's what we are going to look at, and that will require discussion on certain verses which deal with this concept. So starting with the very first concept here, Krishna starts with the body. Okay, means since Arjuna's first fear was that he's going to kill so many people and he's going to kill his own relatives, his own people are going to die. So he was really depressed about this factor. This was one of the biggest sorrow that he is having. So to address that, the very first initial, the opening verses Krishna speaks is about the body. That's what we are going to look at first. So the very first point, don't get perturbed by big changes, even death of near and dear ones. So he gives two ways of explanation. So just like I have mentioned, there is a theological way, that means requiring some amount of faith, and then there is logical ways. I mean, it doesn't require so much faith. Logically, if you think about it, those ways will also look very clear and practical. So here also Krishna presents both ways, theological explanation as well as logical explanation for this. And first I am going to the theological explanation, where there is a concept of soul coming into picture, Atma coming into picture, self coming into picture. So in Indian tradition, definitely most of us must be knowing that the Indian tradition, the Vedic tradition, anybody can just confirm that I'm connected, because there is some network issue things. Anybody can just confirm?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yes.
yeah. So here we are talking about the very first aspect that Krishna is talking about, and he's talking about the body, and he's talking about the self which is residing within the body. Now, this concept of self, the Atma, Krishna himself says in the Gita that it is not very easy to perceive. So don't think that if I tell you right now, you will be able to perceive that there is an Atma sitting within you. It is very difficult to perceive. So we identify with our body. We say that who is the self? Means self is the body. Means who is you? Means who is yourself? If somebody says yourself means that particular person, that particular body, that particular person who is standing in front of us. So that is the body of that person, right? So that is the whole personality of that person. So observing that person means you're observing that personality, and it is not only the physical body, but the personality also has other aspects, right? So it also has the subtle aspects which we cannot see directly, but we can feel. For example, uh, when we see the person, we are looking at the physical aspect. So when we are talking about here about the person, when we see a person, it is about seeing the personality. So there are certain aspects of the person that we can see directly, right? For example, his physical body, appearance, face, his looks, his dress, his color, his height, things we can see clearly. Whereas there are certain aspects that we cannot see, right? For when you interact with the person and you stay in contact with that person for some time, you get to know his subtle aspects, like what is his thought process, how intelligent he is, how egoistic he is, how emotional he or she is. So all those things come gradually to us. So these are subtle aspects of the personality. These are not something which we can see, but we observe, we feel, we get information about this by interacting with the person. So there are two aspects. One is the gross aspect, which is visible from eyes, and then there is a subtle aspect which is not so clear that cannot be seen from eyes. That can be observed gradually when we come in contact with the person and establish some interaction with the person. Likewise, the Gita says, and in general Vedanta says that there is the subtlest aspect. Beyond these two aspects, beyond the body and the subtle aspects called mind, emotion, there is the subtlest aspect, which is the Atma or the soul, which is the actual driver of the body, actual person. So that soul, the Sanskrit term for that is generally Atma or the self. Atma is more closely or more correctly translated as the self. Who is yourself? Yourself is not the body, not the mind. These are the gross and subtle aspects of your personality, but the self is actually the Atma or the core living force within yourself. So that is regarded as the self. Of course, the body, mind, etc., are also part of the self. These are the tools, these are the interfaces through which the self is working. So that's why uh, self is regarded as the Atma. Now, theologically, if we accept that yeah, there is an Atma, then these verses can be understood. If we don't, okay, I have not seen Atma, I cannot basically accept that there is an Atma. This is only the body, and once the body is finished, there is nothing else remaining. For that, also, there is an explanation given. Both sides, for both arguments, there is an explanation given over here. Whether you believe there is an Atma in the body or you don't believe. So, for both the cases, Krishna gives explanation, examples. So, and he also says that even if it's not very easy to grasp it, it's not very easy to visualize the Atma. You may be able to visualize the body, you may be able to visualize the mind, ego, emotions, intelligence, but it is not very easy to visualize the core self or the Atma. So this concept of Atma that comes again and again, which is very core in the Gita, if even if we believe whatever is being said is true and there is an Atma residing within us, it's not that easy to observe. Of course, there are tools given, there are ways given, there are techniques given through which we can try to observe it. We can try to place ourselves in a situation where we can observe, we can feel the presence. But it's not very easy. It's not very quick to do. It needs practice. It needs sustained effort, etc. According to the text. So I'm not saying this as per my experience. What I'm saying is based on whatever is written in the text or whatever is written in the description. So there are several verses which say that it is not very easy for common people, for every one of us who are working in the world and interacting with so many people, doing so many different things. It is not very easy for us to go to the level of the self or the Atma. We can definitely observe the body, we can observe the mind, but if you want to really observe the self or the Atma, it requires a lot more effort. So keep that aside for the time being. If you just assume that, okay, that fact is correct, that fact is applicable, then we can go ahead and discuss these verses, right? So let us see, what do these verses tell us? The first verse is, na atunasam natvam neme janadipa na chaivana bhavishyama sarve vayam atah param. So this verse translation is also given over here. It says, you nor me nor this king will ever cease to exist. Let's just summarize the meaning of this word. So Krishna is saying that you are worried about all these people dying. You are afraid that all these people will die. But hold on. Truth is that neither you nor me nor all these kings will ever cease to exist. They will always exist. Even if their present bodies are finished, they will always exist because they are not their bodies. They are different from their bodies. So here there is a distinction coming. He's making a distinction between the self, the actual self, which is eternal, and the body, which is temporary, which is going to die, which is eventually going to die anyway. So he's making that distinction. And then there are a couple of very good analogies given over here. The next verse that I have put over here is Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhirastattarna muhyati. So here Krishna is saying that just like an individual passes from child body to a youth body and then to an old man's body, and finally after death, just like there was a transmigration from infant's body to a baby's body to a child's body to a youth's body to an old man's body, just like that, after death there is a simple change that happens. The self or the Atma leaves the old man's body and enters another body, a new body. So this change is inevitable. It is cyclic in nature. You should not get so perturbed and disturbed by this. This is always going to happen. So because this is inevitable, you should not stress so much about it. You should not basically get so perturbed by this inevitable change. That's what he's trying to say. That it is obvious, means you are seeing that in your life also, your body has changed, right? From the baby's body, youth body, old man's body, and finally it's going to exit and it's going to assume a new body. So since this change is so inevitable, it is so much valid for each and every one. You should not worry about the inevitable change. Ultimately, the self is going to definitely leave that body and go. So as a duty, since you are supposed to kill these people because they have done the wrong thing, don't worry so much about their bodies. Their present bodies will anyway go, and they have done the wrong thing. Therefore, killing them is the right thing. You should not get so much attached to their present bodies. Neither you should get so much attached to them emotionally. You have to look at the right duty. So he's just trying to create the platform. He's just trying to establish the platform where Arjuna can start understanding the difference between the body and the self, the difference between the body and the mind, so that gradually he can elevate himself and detach himself from all these bodily effects and also the effects of emotions, mind, etc. So the first thing is trying to shake him up and trying to elevate his thought process, elevate his emotions from the bodily level, trying to make him realize that he himself is different from the body, and all these people who are standing there, they are also not their bodies. The bodies are temporary, they are going to go, and change is inevitable in this world. In all aspects, the change is always going to happen. So this is the first basically discussion that is happening in the Gita, in the second chapter. So when Krishna starts speaking, he starts speaking about the body. And then the third one is also another very famous analogy. It says, Vashansi jirinani yatha vihaya navani grinnhati naro parani तथा शरीराणि विहाय जीर्णानि अन्यानि संयाति navani dehi. So vasansi jirnani means vasansi means clothes. Jirnani means old ones. So just like we discard our old clothes, worn out clothes, and we take new ones, just like that, the self or the soul or the Atma, it discards or leaves the old and worn out bodies which are no more functional, which are no more suitable for activities, and then it assumes a new fresh body. So this is also a very strong analogy that changing clothes is a daily affair for us. Means when a cloth gets worn out, it is no longer usable, we just discard it. Similarly, the self, the Atma, when it has a body which is very, very worn out, which is not very usable anymore, it simply discards it. It simply leaves and assumes a new body. So you should not worry so much about it. It is good that it is discarding the old body and getting a new body. It will be more functional over there. So he's trying to put some positivity over here, over death. But okay, means don't take death as a very negative thing. Ultimately, it is a good thing in one sense because the old worn out bodies or damaged bodies or injured bodies, they are no longer usable. And therefore, the soul is going to exit and assume a new body. So it is an inevitable thing anyway. And this is the law of the nature. So you should not worry so much about this. So these are the explanations given just to basically elevate his thought process from the body and elevate his attachment from the body, or basically eliminate his attachment to the bodies. Now, the next discussion is just after these. The next point that is mentioned. These are another set of shlokas where an alternate point of view is mentioned. It is more logical and it is basically maybe more appealing to people who are not ready to believe in soul, who don't want to believe that there is a soul, there is an Atma. So for them also, Krishna presents a logical explanation. He says the first verse over here, if you see, Atha chainam nitya jatam nityam vam manyase mritam tathapi tvam mahabaho nainam sochitum arhasi. So this says that if you assume that the self is actually born, that means the individual you're talking about, the individuals you are seeing in the field, if you assume that they are actually born and they also die, what I have told you earlier is that the self, the actual self, never dies, is never born. It is eternal and it is just passing from one body to another body. So I'm telling you that the self is higher than the body. The bodies are temporary. They are anyway going to die. They take birth, they die. But the self which is residing in the body, that never dies. It just travels from one body to another body. I have told you this, but if you don't accept it, if you don't believe it, if you can't feel it, here is another explanation. It says that, okay, if you assume that the self actually dies, is actually born, then also you should not lament, right? Why you should not lament? Because in the next verse he says, Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityu, dhruvam janma mritasya cha, tasmad aparyaryarthe natvam sochitum arhasi. Jatasya means the one who is born. Jatasya hi dhruvo means that is definitely sure. Dhruvo means it is sure. So the one who is born, his mrityu or death is sure, 100%. And dhruvam janma mritasya cha. The one who is dead, his birth is also sure, means rebirth is sure. So therefore, for inevitable changes, you should not worry so much. Because even if you assume there is no soul, body is the only thing, the one who is born, by nature, he has to die. There is no other way around it. Therefore, you should not worry about the inevitable fact. And then corresponding to that further logic that is given over here, the third point, Avyaktadani bhutani vyaktamadhyani bharata avyakta nidhanani eva tatra ka parivedana. Now here he says that avyakta means something which is not visible, something which is not manifest. Vyakta means something which is visible. So avyakta adini bhutani, pani means the living being or the individual or the person. So avyakta adini bhutani, that means in the beginning means that before the person is born, he is not visible to us. We don't know where he is. He is not existing for us, right? That's what it says, that Avaktadini, before the birth, Adi, before the birth, the person is not visible to us. We don't know where he is. He is not existent for us. And once he's born among us, then he is manifest. Then we can see him, we can interact with him, we can talk to him, we can deal with him in many ways, or her. So only when he is living with us, he is present with us, we can deal with him, we can interact with him, we can see him, he is manifest. And finally, when he dies, then he becomes unmanifest again. So only when he was there within us, among us, we are able to see him. Then only he is manifest before us. Before that, we don't know where he came from, and after he is dead, we don't know where he went. So this is inevitable, thing happening. People come, they stay, they are visible to us, they are in our life, and then finally they exit. So this is inevitable thing. Even if you don't believe in soul, if you are not able to feel the soul, if you are not able to see the self, at least you see the body, and for body this is a truth. When somebody is born, before that we don't know, that person is not there in our mind also. And when the person is dead, after some time that person also evaporates, means he's gone from our memory also. Gradually he is gone. Of course there are some emotional relations which are much stronger, but in majority of the cases that person is gone from our attention also, from our emotions also. Generally these things get weaker, and physically of course it is 100% gone. So these are the explanations he's giving, that okay, even if you don't believe in soul, at least you accept the change, that this change is going to happen. It doesn't matter whether you are able to see the soul or self or not. This body is temporary. It is having this cycle of life and death. You can't avoid it. Therefore, do not worry so much about it. So the first point that was mentioned is that you have to be ready to accept changes in life, including death. And then in the process of elevating his consciousness from the body and trying to take him towards higher self, or having basically becoming an observer of the body and the mind, he's trying to give this first step. First step is look at the body and understand that it is temporary. Understand that it is anyway going to die. Anybody who is born is going to die. And then if you believe, at least if you accept that there is a soul, then you have a more positive point. At least you can say that the soul is eternal. That soul or that self or that Atma, that is going to pass from one body to another. That is the actual individual, and that is never destroyed. So there are a lot of other verses. I have not put all the verses. There are, in the second chapter, when Krishna starts speaking, he speaks many verses about just this. First of all, the point he's trying to make is trying to realize what is body, and then taking him higher and trying to make him basically an observer of the body and the mind, controller of the body and the mind, rather than being controlled by the body and mind. So first of all, we have to know our tools, right? So body is, if we see that body is like a tool, our mind and intelligence are like tools, we should know what is the tool. We should know, what is the importance of the tool and what is the destination of that tool. So here, if you look at the body, and ultimately the body's nature is to die. As long as we are living, we are able to use it, but ultimately it is going to go. So therefore, don't get too perturbed about this change. Be ready to accept that change. Now, next, there are some verses over here that I have taken from some other chapters, like here, 5th chapter, 7th chapter, which talks about some other components. So once the body is clear that this is a body which is made up of matter, and it is ultimately, undergoing changes, right, from our childhood to our youth to our old age and finally death, it is undergoing changes. And then there are many other verses which also talk about the body and the self. Like there is another famous word, Nainam Chindanstrani, Nainam Dahati Pavakaha, Na Chainam Klerayantiapo, Na Shosyati Maruta. So many of us might have heard about this verse or read this verse in our textbooks, in Sanskrit textbooks or Hindi textbooks. So this also tells that Krishna is saying that the self, the actual self, the Atma, is never destroyed. It cannot be destroyed by any kind of weapon, any kind of armor, any kind of force. The body may be destroyed by fire, by water, by air, and by all kinds of weapons. Body can get destroyed, but the self cannot be destroyed. So he's trying to give him a plus point that, okay, if you believe in self, at least you have some more consolence, at least you have some more relief. You can at least believe that, yeah, the self is going to continue. The body is going to anyway vanish, but if you at least believe that the self exists, despite not knowing, despite actually not feeling, if you at least accept, then you have more relief. At least you know that that person is still there. He has gone somewhere. That is the first thing. Next, he comes and talks about the other components. So here, the first verse that I have written, it talks about the body from a different angle. So if you see this verse in Sanskrit is Sarvakarmani manasa sanyasyaste sukham vashi navadware pure dehi neva kurvanna karayan. So I will focus more on the second part of this verse. Giving up attachment to all activities, the self can reside in the city of 9 gates happily. So now this first part we will discuss later. Giving up attachment to all activities, how will it come? What is the meaning of that? That will come later. But more importantly, I want to point out how he is describing the body, how he is describing the physical body. That is the first point. Because unless we contemplate on the physical body and elevate our thought process from the physical body, we can't reach the mind. We can't reach the subtle aspects. We can't be the observer of our mind and emotions. The first thing is we have to be observer of the body and see what is actually happening in the body, what it actually is, and whether we are separate from the body, whether we can become observers of the body. So if we become observer of the body, then it is easy to control the body. For example, if somebody is eating food, right? If some eating food and he is a very good observer, he is very conscious, very alert, and he sees that as soon as his hunger is satisfied, he stops eating because he is very consciously observing that okay, I should eat only as much as I require to satisfy my hunger. I should not just keep on eating and eating and so that I become obese and sick. So he has a sense, he is having some observation, he is making observation of his body and his sense of hunger. The moment he sees that the hunger is satisfied, he stops eating. But many people who do not have control, just because of taste of the food, they may eat more and more. Just because they are liking the taste of the food, they start eating more and more. And finally, this kind of habit leads to bad health. So this is very commonly observed, right? So any other examples can also be, there are many examples we can take, but this is a good example where if we become observer of the body, if we start observing the body and bodily functions, then we can live a healthier and happier life, which is very obvious. So that's why here all these verses are about becoming observer of the body, being slightly detached from the body, not getting engrossed by the bodily function, but detaching ourselves from the body. Then only we can control, then only we can take the right decision. So here, the first verse talks about, it basically compares the body with the city of 9 gates. So 9 gates basically refer to all the 9 holes that we have in the body. Just like in the face, we have 2 eyes, 2 nose, 2 ears, 1 mouth. So the face itself has 7 holes: 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and 1 mouth. And then we have other 2 holes, the reproductive organs and the excretory organ. So these are the 9 holes or the 9 gates of the body. And within this body of 9 gates, the self is situated. So he's just trying to compare and trying to say that, okay, means you are not actually this city. You are not this city of 9 gates. You are the dweller of the city. And you should observe this city. Just like a dweller of the city is able to observe the city, what is going on in the city. Likewise, you assume yourself to be the dweller of the city. Even if you're not able to see the self, at least you can observe the city. Because actually the self is the observer. So you can observe the city of 9 gates in which you are sitting. Don't get too attached to that city. The first thing is trying to make him observer of the body, trying to make him the operator and the controller of the body, not getting controlled by the bodily instincts, but trying to observe, monitor, and closely dictate the body. Then there are further verses over here. For example, the second verse tells, Bhumirapo nalo vayu kham mano buddhirevacha ahankar iti yamme binna prakriti ashtadha. Here there are further elaborations. Both gross and subtle aspects have been discussed here. So the body is made of gross aspects, matter, right? So body is made of matter, and in Indian tradition, in the yoga tradition, the matter is classified into 5 broad categories. That is called Panch Mahabhut, Panch Tattva. So earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So we have in our body earthly matter, right? So we have earthly matter, solid matter. We have liquid, we have water, watery matter. We have fire. Fire doesn't mean that flame of fire. Fire means anything which is having heat component, which is generating heat. So we have fire component in our body because so many reactions are taking place in our belly, and so many chemical reactions take place which are exothermic, and they produce heat, and that heat is distributed all across the body. So definitely there is a heat component or the fire component. So fire doesn't mean flame only. Fire means anything where there is production of heat. So we have fire component which keeps us alive. We need to maintain the body temperature. So there is definitely a fire component. For eating food and for digesting the food, we need the fire component because of the exothermic reactions, the food is getting digested, and we are getting the energy out of it. So there is a fire element, and then there is air element. Of course, we know we have all the air circulation within the body, and we are breathing, and the air is going inside. So there is definitely air component. Our lungs is getting filled with air. Stomach is getting filled with air, and there is definitely air. The oxygen distribution is happening all across the body. So air is also pervading in all the cells. The oxygen is getting transported to all the cells in the body. So therefore, this air component is also there all around. And finally, ether. Ether means empty space. Definitely, there is empty space because if there was no empty space, how would this contraction and expansion happens? So within the heart, there is empty space. Within the lung, there is empty space. Within the stomach, there is empty space. Everywhere, there is a lot of empty space also. So these are the 5 elements out of which the body is made. Elements means the gross elements, I would say the gross categorization of the elements. This way we can understand the body, the physical body is made up of these 5. And then there are subtle elements. Subtle elements means the aspects that we cannot see. Whatever is made up of this earth, water, fire, air, and ether, mostly we can see. So this gross body, gross means something which is grossly visible through gross eyes. So these 5 elements we can see. We can see the physical body which is made up of these gross 5 elements. But we can't see the subtle aspects of the person, which are his mind, his intelligence, his emotions, his ego. Those things we can't see. So Krishna says that Krishna is assuming the role of the controller or the Ishwar or the divine. If we assume that Krishna is the basically divine, if we assume that Krishna is basically the supreme person who is speaking over here, so here he is talking about himself as the owner and proprietor of all these energies. He says that it's me who is providing all these energies. These energies, these matter as well as the subtle energies, subtle aspects of the personalities are basically originated from me. That's what he's saying over here. So he says that both these gross energies and the subtle energies, subtle means the mind, intelligence, ego, which is not visible to eyes, but they are a personality's aspect. Means anybody's personality is dictated by these aspects as well. Not only the physical appearance, but the subtle aspects like the mind, intelligence, ego. So these are all my separated energies. So just like matter, we know E equal to mc square, right? So matter is also energy. So just like this matter are set of energies, different energies that I have created. Likewise, the subtle aspects, mind, intelligence, ego, these are also like separated energies, which are basically created by me. So the mind is the yogic system that is divided into 4 parts. The main 3 parts, Buddhi, Manas, and Ahankar, are given over here. Usually, let's look at the pie chart over here. There are 4 parts in this: Buddhi, Manas, and Ahankar. Buddhi, Manas, and Ahankar, they are basically parts of the mind. So it's not that we can divide the mind physically and figure out where is Buddhi, where is Ahankar, where is Manas. Mind is just a bundle of thoughts. We can say that this is a bundle of thoughts. Now we can observe the thoughts and we can see that which thought, which part of the mind is connected to Buddhi, which part is connected to the Ahankar, and which part is the mind actually. So if you see, if I look at say ego, so there are certain thoughts which establish our ego, that I am so and so, I have studied here, I am doing this job, I am born in this family, this is my village, this is my city, this is my country. These are the thoughts or identification which are called ego. So all these thoughts, all these memories, all these attachments are concerned with ego because they build our identity. And then there is something called intelligence. Intelligence means discriminatory power. Means we can decide, okay, what is correct, what is not correct, which direction to go, where to not go. So intelligence is the discriminatory, decides what to do, what not to do. So that is the intelligence that we have. And then intelligence also comes through memory, right? So we learn through memory. So there is a lot of memory in our brain as well, and in our consciousness, in our mind. We have a lot of history of activities that we have done. We have experiences. Based on that, we have learned a lot of things: what is right, what is wrong, and then that basically provides the intelligence. That provides us the right kind of direction. Because, for example, in childhood, we may have touched fire and we have burned our fingers. Then we have got intelligence because of that experience. So this is something dangerous. We should not touch it. So that is the intelligence part, discriminatory power, what to do, what not to do. And then the mind is a broader aspect where all kinds of thoughts, all kinds of emotions, all kinds of, I would say, the conscious activity of the mind goes on. So that is, there are three divisions that are given over here. So if we feel, means they are ultimately part of the same mind. So mind can be taken as an umbrella term, and all these things are within the mind. They are not separate from the mind. But we want to decide, if we want to segment them based on the function, we can figure out which thoughts, which memory, which functions are related to ego, which functions are related to intelligence, and which functions are related to just feelings, emotions, thoughts, etc. So the mind is also having a lot of thoughts. Continuously there is thoughts coming, inputs coming from outside world, and the mind is reacting to it. And there are a lot of memory also. Mind keeps reflecting on those memories as well. So mind is always active based on the current inputs and also the past experiences. It is completely churning the thoughts, completely, it is remaining active all the time. So that is the mind part, and intelligence is the discriminatory part, decision making part, and ego is the set of thought, the set of mind, the part of mind basically, which gives us identity. We have so many identities. So ego part is the identity. And then he says, next is apariyatustonyam prakritim viddhi me param jiva bhutam mahabaho ye yedam dharyate jagat. So here this third verse is saying that beyond this matter, beyond this subtle and gross matter, which is basically body, mind, there is a subtler. Yes, tell me. Okay. So the third verse says that beyond this gross body and subtle body, beyond this. Anybody can confirm whether I'm audible?
Now you're.
Okay. Okay. So I hope I was discussing the last verse over here, and I was trying to point out that what is he saying about the self. So the last verse tells, it says that beyond this subtle and gross body, beyond this gross body of physical elements and the subtle aspects of the personality, there is a self which is even higher, which is one step higher, and that is the ultimate person. That is the actual eternal being, which is going to go from one body to another body. So these physical body as well as the subtle aspect of the personality, they are temporary and they will decay and they will die. They will keep changing. Our mind also keeps changing, right? Intelligence keeps changing depending upon how we have learned, what kind of education we have. It keeps changing. Ego also keeps changing. Today somebody is in India, he is an Indian, he goes to US after studying and takes a job over there. He takes, he stays there for a long time, gets citizenship, then he becomes an American, and then he will be cheering for America also in a football team. So he has double identity now. So likewise, ego also keeps changing. mind definitely is always in flux. It always keeps changing. Thoughts keep changing. Emotion keeps changing. Sometimes we are having sweet emotions. Not just the next we can have drastically, horrible emotions. So the mind keeps changing. Intelligence keeps changing. Ego keeps changing. The body, which is made up of earth, water, fire, air, ether, it also keeps changing from childhood through youth to old age. It also keeps changing. So these aspects, the physical body and the subtle aspects of the personality, they are always changing, and change is their nature. But what Krishna is saying, that beyond this, there is the real self or the Atma, which is never changing. It is the eternal self, which is actually stable. That is the actual person who is sitting within you. And if you basically come to that level, once you accept this, even if you don't understand, if you are not able to even see that, you're not able to feel that self, but at least if you accept that, then you will be able to observe the other things, the lower parts. That means you will be able to observe the mind, intelligence, ego. You will be able to observe the body. Then you become an observer. That is what is being said over here. So, so as I said, there are definitely some amount of theological aspects coming here, and there is some faith component coming here. So if you don't readily accept that there is an Atma, then it is difficult to appreciate all this. But what I can say is, even if you don't feel, even if you don't understand or don't accept that there is Atma, at least if you accept that there is a higher force which is eternal, which is not changing, and that is the actual self, and that is able to observe. That is actually me, and that me is able to observe my lower self, which are always changing. So it is like, just like, we have the body, and we are wearing clothes keep changing every time. We can observe the cloth when it is dirty, when it is clean, when it is crushed, when it needs ironing, when it needs washing, when it is completely worn out and want to discard it. So just like we can observe the clothes are changing daily. Our body is not changing at that rate, right? The body is, within a year doesn't change so much. Few years, yeah, every few years there is some change that is more observable, but doesn't change so quickly. But the clothes are changing very quickly. Likewise, if you are looking at the self, the Atma, that doesn't change at all. That is always stationary. That is always eternal. That has no change. That has no death. That has no birth. And that is residing, or that is riding on this body. And that is basically playing with this body. That is acting through this body. That is acting through this mind. So then, if we accept this, then there is the possibility of being the observer of the mind, observer of the subtle aspects, which is mind, intelligence, ego, etc., and also being observer of the body. Then we have better chance of being able to control the mind and the body. That's what we are trying to say. So it requires a lot of contemplation, requires a lot of, then only we can get to this point. And then, today we are already out of time, so I will stop here. There are a lot of very interesting verses after this, which basically give us more concrete method to realize this hierarchy of mind, body, and how to basically become an observer of mind, etc. That I will cover tomorrow. So I had made, I was expecting that I will be able to cover this today, but it seems we are already out of time. So I will stop here and I will take questions before we end.
Hey, this is Prabhat.
Hi, Prabhat.
So this verse which you said, right? Bhumir apo nalo vayo kamman buddhirevacha ahankaretyamte bhinna prakritimastata. So it's my separated energy, right? So what is the meaning of separated energy? And in
separated means they are different energies. So these are basically different parts, or basically different functional energies. So just like water, ether, air, they are different forms, right? So energy is convertible from one form to another form, but ultimately it can assume different forms. These are just different forms.
And in 7.4, it's the 7.4, chapter 4th verse, right? So in 7.4, he says about his higher energy and his spiritual energy. So does it? So this is what material and spiritual, or there's something else?
Yeah, that's what. So these two verses, first verse is talking about the matter. So he's talking about the matter, which is earth, water, fire, ether, air. Because our body has all this matter, right? That's what I described. And then you have subtle aspect. So this earth, water, fire, air, ether, this aspect we can see. That the body is made up of these elements. Those elements we can see. The watery part, the fiery part, the air component, earth component, all these things we can see. the mind, intelligence, ego are also our part. They are also part of our personality that we can't see but feel. So this is also energies, right? So mind, intelligence, and ego, they are also seen as energies.
Yeah. So these are all material, right? But these are all material energy. But there's something called spiritual, which is our atma or
Yeah,
something.
there's a third verse that I've written here. That is the fifth verse of 7th chapter, the third one here, which says that the living force is the superior energy, which is superior to all this matter.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other question?
I just wanted to ask, you said chit is emotions.
No,
Or
chit is not emotions. Chit is a conscious mind, the part of the conscious mind, which is basically able to observe. So, is a whatever consciousness we have, that is basically considered as the chit. So, there is the observing part of the mind also. So, when we are observing something, it is through the chit. The chit tells us, basically, it gives us the consciousness. Basically, it gives us the observation power.
And what is manas?
Manas is a broader term. Manas is made up of all kinds of memories, thoughts, etc. So it is always churning with memories and thoughts. So all the conglomeration of thoughts and memories and feelings and emotions, these are in the manas, the mind.
Okay, thank you.
But the Gita says about these three things: man, ahankar, and buddhi. Mind, intelligence, and ego.
Yeah.
Mind is a broader term. It has several other divisions. So here, Krishna is stating a smaller division for us to understand easily. So he's just talking about three major divisions: mind, intelligence, and ego. In yoga, there are even more divisions. There are further more divisions of the mind. Yeah. So any other question?
And mind, which is superior out of these two, mind and intelligence?
So mind is, as I said, it is a complete. It's a conglomeration of thoughts, emotions, feelings, etc. So all the time we have some thoughts running in the mind, some emotions running in the mind, something going on, right? So it is recycling lot of information, recycling lot of thoughts, and getting input from outside, reacting to it. So it is having all that thoughts, reactions, emotions, feelings, etc. Intelligence is the discriminatory power, decision making power, what is right and wrong. That discrimination power comes from intelligence, right? So, for example, when I give you an example of, for example, the fire example, where a child whose finger is getting burned by a candle, he will be more cautious about touching the flame again. So, through experience, he gains intelligence, the decision making power, whether to play with fire or not. So that is the discriminatory power, deciding between right and wrong, deciding the right action, wrong action. That is intelligence, and that comes from right knowledge. That comes from right experience or right knowledge. So it's not necessary that the child has to burn the hand. If he's getting the right knowledge from a senior and he accepts it, then he doesn't touch, and he's careful. So it can come through experience. It can also come through right knowledge given by the right source.
Okay.
So ultimately, when we are anything, when you are solving a maths question, so if we don't want to make mistake, we have to be intelligent. We have to think, and we have to decide right and wrong, which step is right, which step is wrong, which formula is right, which formula is wrong, what to apply, what not to apply. All that execution happens through intelligence. So that is the discriminatory power, the power of choice, where how to proceed, how to act, what action to do, what action not to do. So that is a part of intelligence. So for example, when you are solving a cash question, there is reasoning over there, right? So you have to apply reasoning, you have to apply logic, you have to apply all your thinking ability, what is right, what is wrong. So all that reasoning is part of intelligence, IQ.
Yeah. But sometimes we do something which is wrong.
That is because we don't have the right intelligence. So many times intelligence can get corrupted. We don't have right information, we have not learned the right knowledge, then intelligence will be also not so correct. So it depends upon, because intelligence is coming from learning, right? So if you don't acquire right learning, your intelligence will also not be perfect. You will also have corrupt intelligence.
Okay, no, this mind interfering intelligence, because sometimes you know that this is right, then this is wrong, but sometimes driven by our desires and something which we really want to experience.
Yeah, that's true. So despite having the right intelligence, sometimes you may do the wrong thing. That is also possible, and that is also described. So in subsequent verses, that is also described.
Okay. Okay.
Why that happens? Even if we have right intelligence, we know what is right, what is wrong, we may end up still picking the wrong. And that may happen because of other factors. We will see those factors.
Okay. Sure. Thank you.
Any other question? I think a lot of people have commented. Let me look at the comment box quickly.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, so I have a question regarding this classification of the parts of mind. So
Yeah.
Chit is basically your consciousness. Manas is the mind overall umbrella that you were talking about. Buddhi is intelligence, and I can't read the fourth thing. I don't know why.
Ahankar, there is ego.
Ego. Okay. So what can you if you have some idea about the modern medical science also, what is the part that modern medical science would not they don't take that into account? For example, the soul part, definitely modern science will say that we don't consider as a part of yourself.
Yeah.
So what part of from this is usually neglected in the modern science?
See, the modern science has a lot of things which it cannot observe, right? So even Krishna says in the Gita that it is very difficult to observe the self. You can't observe the self with your eyes or with your mind, with your thought. You can't observe it. So it is very difficult to observe it. The way it is made, we can't really very quickly get access to the self and observe that, yeah, here the self is sitting, here am I. That is a very difficult process, and there is a step given for that. It's not that it's impossible. Then Krishna also gives the steps to do that. How to, if you really want to see it, you really want to observe it, follow these steps. The entire formula is given. If we are able to follow that, good, we can go ahead. If we are not, then we should not blame. So if we are, somebody is able to completely follow those steps and then still not able to do, then it's a problem, of course. But there clear steps are mentioned, that this is the way you can become basically an observer of the self. You can basically see the, or basically you can't say that you can see the self, but at least you can feel the self. You can basically identify with the self. So that process is given. And then there are a lot of research also on this process of incarnation, etc. Now, since we are talking about a bit of faith component, let me elaborate on that a bit, because that is, I mean, of course, as you said, scientific research should be required to prove what is truth and what is not so much truth. So you have heard of this Ian Stevenson case, right? So Ian Stevenson was a professor of psychology in US, and he was a very famous scientist. So he did a lot of case studies all across the world on reincarnation. So there are very few cases, a very small fraction of cases where some children claim that they can remember previous life. So he basically collected all those cases. He tried to visit all those people, all those children who said that there is a previous life memory, and then he tried to connect them with the previous lives experiences, whatever they were telling, that okay, I was born in this village, I was born in that family. So he did all this research and tried to see how many such true cases are arising. So he wrote a conclusion that thousands of cases were analyzed, and in majority of the cases there is no better way to explain this happening other than the concept of reincarnation. So he did not only in India but in US and all across the world. He basically encountered these cases, and he has research papers on this. He has thousands of cases, not just one. He has written books on this. So of course, scientifically he cannot observe. He can't see the soul. He doesn't have any tool. He doesn't have any thing like a special telescope or microscope or whatever. Doesn't have any tool to observe the soul. It cannot be observed like that. But he's just deriving inference that okay, based on this observation, that some people claim to have something called past life memory. Is it true? And he analyzed all those cases, and he saw that these people were able to link with their previous lives, and they were identifying people in the previous life. They had all the memories, all the details, and he was surprised. So he basically concluded that there cannot be any other explanation. He could not. He tried his best to refute them. Maybe there is some accidental brainwashing happening. Some people are feeding him the wrong kind of memory. That's why the child is able to say these things. He analyzed all those angles, detailed research, but he could not figure out an alternative explanation. So that is very well documented. That's why scientists, whatever they are able to do experimentally, they are doing. So based on those observations, also some of these things can be understood.
Okay, thank you, sir. I have other questions, but for other audience, I will keep it for the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mrigank, Manish here.
Yeah, hi Manish.
Basically, this soul, you were talking about the soul. So, soul is same for all creatures, or it is different for human beings and different for other creatures? Like, number of human beings is varying, so it is continuously increasing. So, if the soul is just changing the body, how these extra souls are coming in?
No, so that as per Gita, as per the Upanishads, as per the Vedantas, they are the same. So the quality or the essence of the living force is same. So in Gita, there are clear verses mentioning this, that you should not see all these different living beings actually different at the core. At the core, they are the same. They're the same living force. The quality or the core Atma, the self, is same. It's very clearly mentioned. There is no doubt. That we may not be able to feel, but if we have to look at the theory, what is given, that is what is given. Because ultimately there is all this reincarnation concept is not just limited to species. It's not that human will go to human body only. They can go to any other body also. So that is also given in, that is a theological aspect. Again, it requires a lot of discussion on that, but and because you have asked this question, I'm just stating the fact as what is given in the Gita or Upanishads. So it says that the soul or the self from one body can go to any other body. It can go to an ant's body, it can go to a god's body, it can go to a king's body, or it can remain it can go to any species depending upon the karma, depending upon his past activities. So at the core, all these species are having same life force, or the consciousness or the Atma is same.
So should this soul remain alive or remain idle without any body? Can the soul exist without any body?
So yeah, this is definitely now this is you are going deeper into the theological part, so it requires even more.
We can discuss it later.
Yeah, so we will definitely keep a session where we can discuss all these things, because these are theological part. This requires a lot of faith to understand and accept these things. So people who are here for the application part, for them it will be too heavy to digest actually.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll definitely keep some session on the theology part, those who are interested, and I always like discussing those parts also. So in the common session, we'll try to restrict to the application. And I'm just concerned that there may be some students who are not so interested in the theology part. They may get a little bit confused about this. So for those who are interested, I will definitely keep a good session, couple of sessions on this. Yeah, any other question? So there are a lot of questions in the text box, and let me just quickly go through some of them. There's a lot of questions actually in the text box also. So Aditya has asked, and before that Manas has asked, Manju. So Manju is the first one, it seems. Manju's question is, let me quickly go through that. It is writing below. Manju's question is, as death is either inevitable or it's only the body which dies, not the soul, we should not punish people for crime like murder, is not it? See, so the death is inevitable, that is true, but you don't have any right to kill the other person, right? So it is his body, his life. So murder means you are forcibly taking his life. So it is given to him, it is his body, his property. You should not steal it, you should not destroy it, right? You have a car, right? So if you say that, okay, this is my car, this is just a dead thing, and somebody comes and hammers it down and breaks all the windows, punctures the tire, so will you not object? You will definitely file a police complaint, because that car is belonging to you. Although it is a dead thing, it is going to anyway change, it is anyway going to mechanics, it is anyway finally going to get old and go to junk, but it is your car. You have paid for it, you have earned it, you are driving it. Likewise, the body is like a car, the soul is driving it. So nobody else has the right to come and destroy it just because it is anyway going to die, right? That is logic. I hope I could make it clear. Then we have, I hope we are still connected. So then we have next question from Manas. Aditya is saying another question, even if Arjuna believed the concept of Atma. So Arjuna, I think Aditya may have another question in the beginning, I'm not sure. Aditya's question looks a little incomplete. Then Saurabh Mishra has another question. but we can delay the inevitable. Why should Arjun not worry when he is the cause of the loved one's death? So, because here there is a higher factor, there is a duty coming in. People have done wrong and they are supporting the wrong side. And there are evil doers over there who, if they become king, they will cause destruction for the nation. They will cause anarchy in the nation. Therefore, for a higher objective, he must kill them because they are on the wrong side. They are doing wrong things. So that's why he's trying to take away the lower objective. Means just emotional attachment to their bodies and the personalities. We may have emotional attachment to personalities and their bodies because we have been associated with them. But he is directing him towards higher objectives. That hey, I mean, this is something temporary. Bodies are anyway going to go. So rise above that. Look at the cows. Then we have another question from Manas Pandey. Mr. Manas Pandey. He's saying, how we can observe the mind thoughts and observe them as a separate entity, and how that will help to understand ourselves better. So this question, sir, will be answered in the next session. So today we have not gone to that level. We have just looked at the body part and we have tried to understand the divisions of the mind. So tomorrow we'll try to make it a little more clear. And we had definitely some discussion how to observe the mind, how to observe the thought, but definitely tomorrow's session will be more clear. So one thing you can definitely do is if you just sit quietly and try to see what is going on in the mind. So we can at least observe the thought, right? So we can be conscious of the thought. So don't get identified by the thought. Just see what thought is coming. In the meditation process, when we sit alone and try to stay still and try to observe what kind of thoughts are coming. At least we can watch those thoughts, right? Some thoughts will be good, some thoughts will be bad, some thoughts will agitate us, some thoughts may give us good feeling. So for that, we can keep observing the thoughts. So when we practice this observation of the thought, then definitely gradually we can completely observe the mind's activity also. For example, when we are going out in a shop and we are anybody, am I still audible?
Yeah, audible.
Yeah, fine. So here we can always observe the thoughts that are going on in the mind. One example is, suppose you're going out and you see some sweets in a sweet shop, and because you remember the sweet's taste, your mind says that, okay, this taste was really good. I mean, I really liked that sweet last time. And therefore the mind tells you, you should go again and buy that sweet and eat it. So that all that memory, all that thought, all that attachment to the sweet, that is coming because of the thought process. The thought is remembering that taste. It is remembering that sensation. And that sensation is driving you again back to that same object. So if you observe what is going on, ultimately it's just a mechanism, right? So it's a mechanism of thought. So the tongue has tasted something, your mind remembers that the sense of taste, and that mind is again recalling that sense. If you say that, okay, I am a diabetic patient and don't want to eat that sweet. If you take a firm decision because you have an intelligence given by the doctor that this is harmful for you, you should not take it. Then you have a firm decision. Then you say that whatever my mind says, that doesn't matter. I have a higher intelligence given by the doctor. I will follow that. I have deciding power. The doctor has said me these things, and therefore I remember all these instructions. I will follow that. And with that determination, you subdue the mind. Whatever thought you may have, I don't care. If the mind is telling me to go and eat that, but I have higher decision power, I will not listen to the mind. I will not remember that taste. I will not go for that sense of taste. I will not go for that pull that is coming from the mind. So that way we can start observing the mind and start controlling its dictates, start controlling its function. That is what is going on. So we'll take a lot of examples. This is something on which we can have numerous examples we'll look at. And then Abha saying, what is there which is observing thoughts of what is there which is observing our thoughts also. So again, what is observing the thoughts? So as I said, you have to assume that this is the self, right? So self is the observer. So yourself, you are not the body. You are also not the mind. So whatever you can observe, you are not that. That's what the logic is. If you can observe the body, you are not the body. You can observe your thoughts. You can see your thoughts. You can change your thoughts. You can control your thoughts. You are certainly not your thoughts. You can change your emotion. You can revert your emotion. You can refine your emotion. You can also distort your emotion. You can have hatred and envy also. So you are definitely not the emotions because these are changeable things. The one which is observing, the one who is not being changed, who is eternal, who is always fixed, who is just observing, who is just making use of these things. He is the self, or he or she, whatever you call it, that is the self. That self is supposed to observe the thoughts. That self is supposed to observe the mind. That self is supposed to observe and control the mind, and also observe and control the body. Right? So we have to. This is the principle of neti neti. In the Sankhya Yoga, it is called neti neti concept. That okay, not this, not this. And this is not the self. This is not the self. So whatever we are able to observe, whatever is changing, whatever we are able to change and control, those are not the self. These are part of our self. These are our. The body is our. The body belongs to us. Just like a car belongs to us, the body belongs to us. The car may change, means the color may fade and the engine may break down. It requires fuel. It requires repair, all that stuff. But the car is not us. We are sitting in the car and driving the car. We are able to observe the car's function. Its speed is going fine. It requires repair. It is having the right kind of AC working. So all those functionalities, the appearance of the car, all the tools within the car, the gadgets within the car, all those things we can observe and control. If something is going bad, we can replace. If we are not a good observer, if we fail to observe that the car is faulty, brake is failing, we are not able to observe that, clutch is not working, we are not able to observe that, so definitely we are going to meet a disaster. Therefore, it is very important that the driver has a good observation of the car. So likewise, for the body also, we are the self sitting in the body, and then we should be able to observe that body and the mind. That is the analogy. Then Aditya has another question. Arjuna believed the concept of Atma if he would have not killed his relatives. If his relatives would live longer, enjoy more experiences. I think I already answered this. So living longer is not the important thing here. What is important is what is right and what is wrong. So if he's not killing them, he's allowing the wrongdoers, allowing evil people like Duryodhana to stay and become rulers, which is going to be destructive for the entire nation. Because Arjuna, the Duryodhan in Mahabharata, he is portrayed as a very evil intentioned person, very bad ruler, a very indisciplined ruler. So under his control, the subjects, the praja will never be happy. That is the way he is portrayed. So and he has always tried to tried to create damage for Pandavas. He has tried to commit atrocious crimes against them. He has tried to kill them so many times. So his evil intentions are always coming forward. So that's why he's not the right person to rule the kingdom. So it's not only his enmity towards Arjuna and Pandava. Along with that, his overall demeanor, his overall, I would say, the concepts of dharma are not very good. Means he's depicted as an evildoer. He's not the right person to rule the kingdom. He doesn't have the knowledge of right and wrong. He doesn't know what is dharma, what is adharma. Therefore, allowing such people to go at the helm and control the country is going to be damaging for the nation. That is the main reason why Krishna wants him to discard all these bodily emotions that, okay, this is my grandfather, this is his body, I should not kill him. So trying to say that body, don't worry about that. Anyway, this body is going to die. Anyway, it's going to be gone. You look at the higher objective. The objective is more important. If there was no reason, of course, without reason, you can't go on killing people. But here, there is a much higher reason. They have supported something which is very, very wrong. And therefore, they deserve to be killed. That is the reason. And then Aditya is asking another question. Even if Arjuna believes the concept of Atma, if he would, that is the same thing. Next, I have Abha's question. Abha is asking, the intelligence is manifestation of our memories. If yes, then how sometimes we act according to our instinct? Please explain. So intelligence is not manifestation of the memory. Intelligence is something which is gained, and of course it is refined as we learn more and more. From experiences, from knowledge, we get better intelligence. So if we have, for example, if you have to solve a question, unless we have the knowledge about that procedure, about the formula, about the process, about the steps, you can't solve that question, right? So in order to solve any mathematical question and apply your intelligence, first of all, you have to gather the tool, you have to gather the information, you have to learn the method, you have to learn the formula, you have to learn the steps. Without that, intelligence doesn't work. And whatever intelligence you may have Einstein's or higher intelligence. But if you don't know the method, you can't figure out the formulas yourself every time. You can't basically imagine and find out the solution yourself. So you have to learn the process. So of course, for utilizing the intelligence, you have to get the right kind of knowledge. Of course, some people may already have good IQ, and they may be able to utilize the intelligence faculty better. But definitely, the intelligence can always be augmented. It can be improved by proper learning. That is what is being said. Memories, they help in basically refining the intelligence or making it sharper, making it more correct. So based on experience, also we learn the right and wrong, right? So this is just an example of sharpening intelligence through experience. So it's not that it's the manifestation of memory. Memory affect intelligence, or basically they help in refining the intelligence. So based on experience, we learn. That's what is being said here. So if you have experiences, based on that, you can gain intelligence. You can also say wisdom, right? So these are all aspects of the subtle personality. Then we have Pradeep. Pradeep is asking, Darwin's theory is contradicting theory of evolution. What do you say on this? What does man evolve from monkey? This is a question which is not very related to the topic here. I'll rather skip this. So Darwin's theory, many people have contradicted it, many people have disproved it, some people stick to it. So this is something which is not very aligned with this. So let us discuss this offline. Then we have Shashwat Dikshit. We said that connection with the soul is difficult and may not be possible for everyone to do it. How do we come to know that if we will be able to connect to the soul or not? Is doing sadhana for points mentioned in the slides after and trying the only way to get to know about it? So this is a good question, and again, this will be answered gradually. So in subsequent session, we'll be doing it. So Krishna also says, when there is Arjuna, in fact, asked the same question, exactly the same question in the 6th chapter. He says that, okay, means you are telling me all these yoga, meditation, sadhana, through which I can get to the soul and I can see the soul. Now, what happens if I am not able to do it? Because I am putting all the effort in yoga and sadhana and meditation, trying to find out where is the soul, trying to identify with the soul. But it's very difficult. I can't really do that. He says that exactly the same thing. So he says that if I put so much effort and if I fail, what is going to happen? Means it is a waste of my time. Should I really do it? So these questions will be definitely answered. So we will discuss that. These exact questions are given by Arjun also. And it will take some more time to basically delve into this. Then we have Kuldeep is asking questions. There are schools of meditation that only focus on teaching. You'll be 100% conscious of everything around you and within you. And some great thinkers of this school of meditation are Osho and Krishnamurti. So schools are there are many different kinds of people who have propounded different kinds of yoga meditation techniques. So we are not going to go into that. Whatever is authentic, whatever is coming from the Vedas and Upanishads, we are going to look into that. So many people have taken bits and pieces from here and there, some parts from here, some parts from there, and they have proposed certain things. So that is not the complete knowledge. That is not the complete process. So I don't consider Osho and Krishnamurti to be having complete process with them. They have taken some bits and pieces and given to the public. Then you have another question. Please read the story of King Janaka in Mundaka Upanishad. It beautifully explains the Turiya, 4th part. Yeah, I mean, there are, of course, ultimately Gita is a summary of Upanishad. So if you are understanding Gita, you don't really need to go into any other Upanishad. It summarizes the whole thing. So I have also read many other Upanishads, including Mundaka Upanishad. But if you understand the essence given in the Gita, it takes care of all the content in the Upanishads. And then I'm not sure who is GPIIT. I'm not sure who is GPIIT, but his question is the memory and emotion component of the self? So emotion and memory are part of you, just like in the computer, you have the hardware and the software. Computer belongs to you. You are the operator of the computer. The computer has hardware and computer has software. But you are the operator. You can change the software. You can install an antivirus. You can install a new Windows version. You can install any new application. So the software is in your hand. Emotions, mind, thoughts, all the feelings, they are within your hand. If you want, you can change them. If you want, you can stop them. If you want, you can control them. So just like an operator of a computer system has control on the software, and that software has a control on the hardware. I mean, you have both. You are the operator. You are the supreme controller of the computer. Likewise, we are like robots. We are like computers, and we have this software called mind, intelligence, ego, and we have the hardware called the body. And if we want, we can make changes in the software. We can make changes in the intelligence. We can acquire better intelligence. We can sharpen our intelligence. We can learn new things. We can basically change our mind. If we control our mind, we can change our emotions. We can decide what emotions to have, what not to have, what thought to have, what not to have. So it is just like software. If, for example, if we know good instructions from the yoga, if we know good instructions from the Gita, we have something called antivirus, which can help us from bad thoughts and bad emotions and uncontrolled mind. It can help us in that. So that way, just like we can install an antivirus in the computer to protect other software, likewise, if we have the right knowledge from the right source, like the Gita, it acts like an antivirus. We take the decision that, okay, let us install this antivirus and it will ward off all other problems in the software, right? So this is the analogy. Then Debalina Bharadwaj, many warriors on Kaurav side like Bhima, Bhishma and Dronacharya were killed by deceit. Then how can the Pandavas be right? Well, this is something called politics and strategy. So this is not really, so Pandavas also face a lot of deceit. They also face a lot of cheating. And on the other side, to make the right thing win, for the higher cause, Krishna allowed them to do small politics here and there. Means he allowed them to even take help of a lie. So again, the main objective here is, what is the bigger objective? If Bhishma was not killed, if Dronacharya was not killed, the higher objective would never be met. So Krishna even broke his own promise. He had promised that he would not pick up any weapon, but he charged at Bhishma with his chakra. So that is just to instigate Arjuna, just to make him confident, and because Arjuna was not killing Bhishma, he was having emotional attachment. So Krishna picked up his own arm. That was just to show that his promise also doesn't matter. His own word doesn't matter. What matters is the right thing. Because for the world, if there is a higher objective, it has to be met at any cost. If there is a higher cause that has to be met, even if I have to lie for that, even if I have to do some politics for that, even if I have to do some cheating for that, it's okay. But my aim is that higher objective. It is not my own personal goal. It is not my own greed. It is not my own self-interest, but I am working for a higher goal. And that goal is good of the society, good of the country, good of the nation, good of the public. So that, the right king, the rightful owner, a person who knows what is right and what is wrong, a person who is knowledgeable about dharma, he becomes the king and not a corrupt and evil person. So that is why he's doing all this, right? So we have to look at the bigger perspective. And then there are some more questions here. Soumya Chakravarti is asking, God's incarnation is also the same equivalence. So these things are not very important. God's incarnation has nothing to do with Darwinian theory. So these are two different things. So let us not mix them. And then we have, I'm not sure once again who is GPIIT. So GPIIT is asking, after the body is destroyed, do the memories, emotions stay with the self, or they die with the body? Again, this is something which is theological aspect and difficult to explain very quickly. What happens actually means, I don't want to again clutter things here, but as per the yogic system, as per the yogic knowledge that I have read from many sources, I'm not quoting anything from anywhere, any random source. I'm just quoting what is there in the yogic system and our Upanishads and the Vedas. I'm also not experienced about it. I don't have this experience what happens actually, but just based on what I have read. If you want to stick to the Vedic conclusion, if you want to stick to the Upanishadic conclusion, what happens is the subtle aspect of the body, which is the mind, intelligence, ego, that part accompanies the self. That part accompanies the Atma to the next body. So some subtle aspects accompany the Atma to the next body. So the gross body is completely gone. The body which is made of gross element, fire, ether, air, earth, water, that is completely gone. But the subtle aspects, the body, mind, ego, intelligence, some of that subtle aspect travels with the self to the next body. That's what is said. And the second thing is, I'll give you an example of past life memory, right? So past life memory, how does it happen? Because in certain cases, maybe more memory, more than usual memory accompanies the self to the next body. So that's how it can be explained. So the Yoga Sutras, the yogic principles, the Upanishadic principles, they have this conclusion that the subtle aspects, some of the subtle aspects of the person, which includes the mind, the thought, the emotions, the sanskara, the vrittis, the tendencies, these things travel with the self. So whatever vritti, sanskar, whatever inclinations, whatever desires, those things were there within the mind, and those subtle aspects of the personality, they travel with the self to the next body. And then that's the reason why right from the beginning, the next person in the next body, he starts showing some characteristics. And if by chance some more memory has traveled with him, then he has memory of the past life also vivid. So these are the examples which are there in the Vedanta. And based on some research that has happened, I told you example of Ian Stevenson. There are also lots of past life memory cases were observed, not one or two, thousands of them. And therefore, as far as this conclusion of Upanishad is concerned, I do believe in that, because ultimately that's what the scientist has been able to show, that there was some past life memory in certain cases. How does that happen? Ultimately, subtle aspect of the person travel with that. Again, these are theological aspects. I will try to refrain from it from a general discussion, but we can, as I said, we can have more discussion on this in separate session. Any other question? I think I've answered all the text questions also. And we're already out of time, so almost half an hour extra. So a lot of good questions. So definitely, it is very pleasurable to discuss and have your inputs as well. So these are very good discussions, and I'm very glad that I'm getting so many good questions and discussions.
Hey, just okay. If like I can ask you once the participant drop out, like if you have some time.
Yeah, who is that?
This is Prabhat.
Yeah, please tell me.
Actually, I just wanted to. This is a very fundamental question about the classes. Like, as you're explaining that we are not going to cover much of the theological part, but like from your example, as like if we separate, then how much of a value is it? Like, if we just take the application to make our emotion balance and our life balance, and if we skip the eternal part of it, as you're mentioning, like the body is a car and self is a driver, but
Yeah.
if we just make the body like the car comfortable, it has a AC and so many things. But if it's not reaching the destination, like if you remove the theological part out of it, so how much of this application is meaningful? Like it is then acting on the temporary aspect of the body, right?
No, so see, the self part is important. We can't get rid of the self. So the observer is important. So unless we are able to observe, because we are talking about controlling the mind, controlling the emotions, controlling our thoughts process, and then only we can lead a more balanced life. If we don't have control over mind, body, etc., we can't lead a balanced life or happy life. So first thing is we have to have control over the mind, body. If we are too egoistic, for example, sometimes we turn too egoistic. Somebody tells something to us and then we are angry about it. So because we don't have control on the ego, we don't have control on the feelings, the mind, etc. So unless we are able to step back and observe the functions of the mind, observe the function of the thought, etc., we will not be able to do a good control operation. That's why at least understanding or accepting or at least assuming the presence of the self, which is higher than the mind, intelligence, ego, that is important. And then the other part is self is okay. Now next is super self, God. I mean, who is God? Krishna is God here. He's speaking. What is our relationship with him? What is his nature? How does he act? How does he create the world? Those things are further more theological aspects, right? So we will be skipping those parts. But what is very essential is at least understand yourself, that you at least observe your body, that this body is not you. These hands are not you. These are your hands. This mind is not you. These are your mind. These thoughts are not you. These are your thoughts. You can change it. These emotions are not you. These are your emotions. Whatever sorrow, whatever happiness you are feeling, these are not you. These will come and go. But you will remain stationary as it is. That you is what we are talking about.
Okay. Okay. Because what I have read, like the understanding of self.
Wait a minute. I'm getting a call. Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, means the the identity of a self separated from, like, let's say, the super soul concept, then it's a partial understanding, right? Like that's what, like, what, like, according to what
No, so as I said, you have to understand. You have to apply these things. We have to basically, we have to at least understand. We have to accept the self. So the self principle has to be accepted. Other things like nature of God, etc., is much more theological. And again, people, those who have interest, I will definitely keep sessions on that. But at least you have to understand the self. At least assume that there is a self. That's what we are saying.
so what our assumption of the self, that it is eternal, and
Let us discuss this tomorrow. I am getting calls and I have a lot of other meetings, so I'm already out of time. Let us discuss. Tomorrow we can have more discussion. You can also discuss offline. I'll be happy to discuss. So you have very good questions, and definitely, I'll be happy to take it tomorrow.
yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.